Welcome to Living One. I'm your host, Olivia Crossman. Living One is Kerulos's monthly webinar series, now in its 5th year. With guest speakers from around the world, we listen in to how people are bringing their ethics, minds, and lives into alignment with nature for earth and animal liberation and revitalization. We ask the question, we know what's wrong, but what does right look like? This year, in collaboration with the Plant Initiative, we start off with a special series, Plant Voices, Guides to Understanding Nonviolent Living. Today and through the month of May, we hear 5 speakers reflect on what plants can teach us about nonviolent living, how plant sentience affects and informs plant-based living, and ways to model and maintain nature nonviolence as plant-based consumers. Today, we have the second session in this series. Our guest today is Isabella Clarke. Issy is an independent researcher who has written and presented on non-human animal cultures and relationships with the more than human. She is particularly interested in autonomous animals and plants. She enjoys sitting with trees and other non-human beings, being receptive to the wisdoms that can arise from an open-minded connection with the more than human. Her work embraces the factual and scientific, the theoretical and ethical, and the speculative and imaginal. She works as a broadcast journalist covering sport and volunteers for various conservation organizations in her home country, the UK. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently on various different Indigenous lands. I'm currently on the ancestral homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, which includes the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi. This land exists also as a place of trade with other Indigenous communities, including the Ho-Chunk, Miami, Menominee, Sauk, and Meskwaki. The Kerulos Center for Nonviolence is located on the homelands of the grizzly bear, takelma, dakubedite, coyote, coho salmon, golden eagle, and gray wolf. Issy will be speaking for about 45 minutes, after which we will have 15 minutes for question and answer. Please keep your microphone muted to avoid any unintended interruptions. If you have any questions for Issy, type them in the chat and we will read them out after the presentation. Finally, we ask that all of us participate with full respect and attention to each other in the spirit of peace and wisdom that Living One seeks to foster. So, without further ado, we welcome Issy Clarke.
Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to all of you for your willingness to attend to an arboreal pilgrim. Huge gratitude to Gay, without whose mentorship, support, guidance and encouragement, I wouldn't have pursued my passions. I wouldn't be an independent researcher at all. And gratitude too, in this context, to academic and druid Harriet Sams and psychotherapist, Jungian coach and shamanic practitioner Nina Pikkinen, both of whom helped me greatly through inspirational and supportive coaching sessions. So I'm going to start by offering an illustration of what I do when I sit with trees. First of all, I tend to follow my kind of instinctive attraction. It feels like a particular tree draws me in, attracts me, is seeking the connection in the same way as I am. And I will often, well, I pretty much always visit those trees repeatedly. So I have this sort of like increasing circle of people that I now, want to renew acquaintanceship with on a regular basis. That's why I describe myself as an arboreal pilgrim, because I walk to these particular special beings on numerous occasions. I'm hesitant to use the word sacred because it carries so many various religious and cultural connotations, but there is an experience of reverence as well as intimacy in these encounters. So I'm going to share with you a video because it kind of illustrates what happens when I spend time with a tree. So here's an example. And in this case, my visit is to 2 trees positioned next to each other, oak trees. First, and this process was gifted to me by Harriet Sams, I do ask permission before I step under the canopy. Under the canopy, I look up and am attentive to a sense of being drawn toward the trunk or pushed away. And at this liminal space, right where the canopy above me ends, I pause and see if that place has a special energy. It usually does. Then I approach the tree and I get familiar with their form, their life, their enactment of growth in place. The dialogue between tree and environment is made manifest in wood. I get a sense of who they are and how they've lived and who they live with. I see raptor pellets, under this tree and wonder if a kestrel or an owl has taken one of the tree's branches as their regular roost. I like to be in physical contact with the tree, perhaps leaning against the trunk or sitting on a branch, and then I'm patient. I try to clear my mind of my day-to-day stuff and my egoic preconceptions, and I wait. During my sessions with Nina Pickinen, I saw that this was the same process described as hollowing out in the practice of therapeutic shamanism, which is the form of shamanism developed by Paul Francis. His books are very readable, and just the first one offers an access route into shamanic journeying. That's essentially, I discovered, what I'm doing with trees. And one tree, in reference to hollowing out, actually told me to leave all my selfish baggage behind, or he didn't want to talk to me. I'll leave the video running as I explain a little more. My doings and beings while sitting with trees are matters of intuition and the suspension of disbelief, which I do have to do. That's a pheasant. My thinkings and reasonings about are indebted to feminist and post-humanist literature. For example, I like this quote, though it's referring to animals, and here I'm talking of trees. Compassion, then, for Haraway is the ability for both humans and animals to participate in a common becoming and to be present to who and what are emerging in relationship. It's the capacity not to know each other, but to pay attention to an otherness in common and to the commonality of otherness. This commitment to paying attention and remaining open to the fundamental heterogeneity of other and self in relationship is what constitutes the essence of effective relating in post-human ethics. That's helpful, but when I consider how I feel or what I experience when I sit with trees, I think the term empathy, as it's used in phenomenology, is most apt. And I'm talking about the sort of German phenomenological tradition here. This isn't emotional contagion or some form of projection or imagination, but in the words of Dan Zahavi, empathy is the experience of the embodied mind of the other, an experience which, rather than eliminating the difference between self-experience and other experience, takes the asymmetry to be a necessary, persisting existential fact. What is distinctive about empathy is that it's a distinct form of other-related intentionality, which allows the other's experiences to disclose themselves as other rather than as our own. This is really important. While Zahavi argues that we do have, I suppose, first-order access to other minds through this form of empathy, the contents of the other's mind are experienced by us as theirs, in tonal colour, different from the affects, feelings and desires that are ours. He writes, and I love this, to demand more, to claim that I would only have a real experience of the other if I experienced her feelings or thoughts in the same way as she herself does, is nonsensical and fails to respect what is distinct and unique about the givenness of the other. Of course, there are degrees of clarity and breadth in the sense one has of the other mind. You'll perceive more about the more familiar you are with the other and her context. And that's one of the reasons why I like to visit trees repeatedly. In addition, I do also attend to their physicality, to their environment, and I do some research into what kind of being they are. When we empathize with one who empathizes with us, then this exchange is bidirectional, with the transfer of thinking, feeling, and desiring impacting and altering the thoughts, feelings, and desires of each participant in the interaction. Maurice Merleau-Ponty describes self and other in these situations as collaborators in perfect reciprocity. My experience with trees feels like this, a collaboration in perfect reciprocity. So I'm suggesting that it's not just wisdom that I attain from trees, but affects, moods, sensations, the colour and tone of a personality. This may be a stretch for some of you. And frankly, with my reasoning hat on, it's a stretch for me too. I did mention the suspension of disbelief, but I'm here to talk about my experiences. I can pass them off as something akin to imagination, inspired by a meditative state and my own already existent beliefs. And that may be true, but we know that plants feel, remember, plan, react intelligently. We know they make use of electrical impulses and hormones, as do we. So they don't have a central nervous system or a brain as we know it. But maybe we're being brainist, assuming that only those who are built like us can experience analogously to us. We've had to reassess various prejudices. So maybe this is simply another realm in which we've been blinded by belief in our own exceptionalism. When I leave, I thank the tree and leave a gift. Those two trees, I call them Hugin and Munin after the ravens that sit on Odin's shoulders. I'm going to offer you a slideshow now. These images inspire me and help me recall and re-experience wonder. And I hope they provide the same heightened sense of appreciation in you. And I'm sorry about the noises off. My cats don't appreciate me being on Zoom, but mainly I find myself drawn to mature trees and often old ones. I've found that with very old trees, the conversation can be very slow and is often symbolic or experienced as feelings rather than thoughts. But relatively often, the conversation is simply a conversation. I often have similar messages relayed to me repeatedly. I think the trees regard me as a little slow on the uptake. So, for example, I've often been told that transcendence lies in immanence, that there's no phenomenon separate from the noumenal. They're not two distinct qualities or two aspects of a thing, but both are always and already there. I'm not sure this is exactly the same as like panpsychism or pantheism. I think it's something deeper. I don't think they're saying it's consciousness all the way down, though that might be part of it. It's more a sense of something other than and greater than consciousness or our understanding of the divine. What is that something, you ask? So do I. And I guess that's why the trees keep on having to repeat it. Maybe we don't have the language or the ken of it these days. While trees are distinctly individual, as in having, if you like, personalities and perspectives that are their own, so that they may offer different perspectives on topics, they're not, in my experiencing of them, individuals in the way we tend to think of individuals. They don't place the same value on the individual. They are distinct, but not separate. Part of this is related to their view of time, which is different from ours. It's not just that they live longer, but one tree told me that they experience time all at once. The past, present, and future can all be felt together. It's interesting that in a paper written by a friend of mine who's he's involved in critical animal studies and critical plant studies from the perspective of Norse literature, Old Norse literature. And he sent me this paper after I'd already prepared this presentation. So he writes about the atemporality of trees being explicitly addressed in Norse literature. The paper by Tim Borns concerns tree dreams in Nordic sagas. He cites Christopher Abrams' discussion of Yggdrasil, the Norse world tree. Yggdrasil is forever. It stands in temporal relationship to the gods, as the most ancient trees in our world stand in relation to us. It was here before the gods came into being, and it will be there after they've gone. It's fitting then, as Tim Borns goes on to say in another paper on trees, that it is the three Nornir, named Urther, became, Varthandi, becoming, and Skuld, to become, thus embodying past, present, and future, who nourish and protect the great ash. He also writes that in Norse sagas, dream trees operate between past, present, and future, having this peculiar atemporality. In my tree conversations, the same ideas arose. There's a Zen koan, I'm sure you've heard this. Show me your original face before you were born. That isn't a koan to a tree. The original face before you were born is as much present as the face you bear now. And at the same time, just as present is the face you have after your death. Death then becomes less of an ending, and in that sense, the death of an individual is rather less significant. Indeed, death is part of the process of new becoming. For plants, parts are regularly dying and being let go of. And thinking as a forest, a tree is a part of a forest that will die and be let go of. And in both cases, the letting go enables new growth, provides sustenance, creates new openings and seeds for the future. One thing I learned from this is that it matters what you do with your dying. And by dying, I intend to mean the whole process of life that leads towards death and that seeds new life. And trees do offer, like the Tibetan meditations on death, being with trees is a meditation on moving one's focus from preserving this one individual life toward how my role in this ongoing symphony can be fruitful rather than destructive. And the trees do offer suggestions, some straightforward. Take no more than you need, I've been told. And one old ash tree was very specific about the need for being respectful and offering reciprocity. Another old tree, an oak this time, said that humans went backwards when you started making trees into things trees don't want to be. I asked what trees do want to be, and he said, safe houses. We like to be safe houses.
Issy, can I interrupt you for 1 second? It looks like the presentation is not sharing anymore. We're just seeing a black screen.
Oh, has it gone?
Yes. Maybe just try it again.
Maybe it stop share. Is it back?
It's back. Perfect. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Yes.
In line with what I've said about parts dying, think of the leaves of deciduous trees in autumn, which become food, the flowers, which become seeds, the overshadowed branches or twigs leading into a space where there's not enough light, which are decomposed and may leave holes that become homes. Trees insist in word and deed that life forms attend to what they hold on to and what they let go of. What do I, you, we, our culture need to retain? What should we let go of? Am I myself ready to be let go of? Here I must add a message I received actually only this week. I was sitting with a tree and he told me that these experiences for me are akin to something like a calling. I've discovered my calling, and that's frightening. What does it mean? What new responsibilities do I have? And if that is what I'm going to do, then what do I have to let go of? He told me I need to let go of my ongoing desire to be respected and influential and impressive, that kind of thing. All my self-consciousness and my need to be good enough, to be recognized, admired, all of that will get in the way of my openness. And he said the openness is what matters. This is another repeated message. It comes up again in a moment. I said, but wouldn't it be better if I were able to influence people to revere trees, to love the world? And he said, that can't be your aim. The aim is the doing and the being, and being true to that. So what if people think you're a crazy crone? He said. One person might not. You know about that story about the flap of a butterfly's wings? This holding and letting go is an act of refined judgment, which trees embody as a matter of their becoming. Similarly, they enact another aspect of living, which we would do well to consider. Here I'll relate a conversation I had with a particular tree, the Wayfarer oak. This conversation actually felt like this. It felt like talking with a philosopher. It was all words. It wasn't symbolic. Wayfarer oak. There are different types of wisdom. The wisdom for understanding, the wisdom for deciding, and the wisdom for connecting. That's the one you seek, the one that's related to connection. Me, what is the wisdom of connection? Wayfarer oak. Being in touch, in conversation, seeing how communion enables two beings to come into existence through their mutual attention and entanglement, creating each other as subjects through the acknowledgement of interaction, through the recognition of a connection. But the wisdom that arises from it is mind-altering. You accept that you become in the gaze of, in conversation with, in touching against, through entanglement with the other. I'm usually willing to connect, I said, but I'm intolerant when it comes to humans, not all the time or even most of the time, but far too often I judge them and resent them. Wayfarer Oak, that's what bark is for. Me, what? Wayfarer Oak, trees are beings of many relationships and millions of connections, but we still need protection to close off. You need more bark, but not too much. Too much bark, and you start to jettison the living wood, which is something many humans do in their enforced separation from the world or from ideas they don't like. There's wisdom in determining how much bark is right. Maybe it's not unwise to separate off from some people. So, what to hold on to, what to let go of, and how much bark. I need the wisdom of deciding to assist me with the wisdom of connecting. As for connecting, trees, of course, are wonderful role models in thinking of entanglement, embeddedness, collaboration, and being with. We might think of those concepts in terms of the material world. But as I mentioned, trees have repeatedly encouraged me to feel that connection through being attentive is in itself of intrinsic value. This is a psychological or spiritual or empathic entanglement, and it matters, says the trees. It matters profoundly that we pay attention, that we listen, that we acknowledge, that we truly see our fellow earth beings, that we register their wakeful presence in this wakeful world. Just that, and the world notices. Freya Matthews writes in Living with Animals, to call into the silence beyond human selfhood in search of a reply. This is the moment for which the world has been waiting and in which it will rejoice. The moment when we ask it to speak. To receive its reply is to enter a love far greater than the kind of protection and indulgence that our traditional importunate forms of prayer expect. For that reply signifies that we belong to an animate order, a pattern of meaning from which death cannot separate us and to which suffering only summons us. I realized that my openness to this experience, this synergy, was ignited by my internship with Kerulos. What I came to discover with trees was exactly what Gay was teaching about in those sessions, and what she and Mary Watkins wrote about in their 2006 paper, Trans-Species Psychology, Theory and Practice. They write that what is required is the deprivileging of human language and a renewed reconnection with all other beings, forged out of new forms of listening, alternative modalities of communication. I agree with them that this kind of attending, this kind of being with, could be the basis for the creation of a new episteme and a new praxis. Through attending to the other, openly, respectfully, and in a caring attitude, one feels connected, or rather, one experiences that one is already and always connected. In Ed Casey's talk last week, I asked a question about edges, and this is related because of the idea of being distinct but not separate. This being with is about attending to the eventful edges between distinct beings, the fertile and exciting place where connections are evident and experienced, rather than existing as we humans tend to do in the imagined sequestration of our distinctness. I've just got 3 other messages from trees that I've received, which I think are worth sharing. One is about stories. The stories we tell impact the world. Stories of trees as spirits, protectors, dryads, and the like, granted respect and protection to trees. A tree as timber is seen very differently from a tree as guardian. One tree told me they missed the mythos that bound our lives to trees, and that all the science, the logos, can't compare with the connections communicated through symbol, myth, and earth-based religion. Our stories, the trees tell me, should bind the world together, just as roots hold soil and moisture, as mycelial networks connect, sustain, and provide structure. So should our stories weave earth beings into a network of collaboration, mutual respect, and reciprocity. We have done the world a disservice by disentangling our stories from all else that is and turning them into narcissistic mirrors of our own selfish and anthropocentric impulses. We've done the world a disservice by divesting it of enchantment. That's part of the message about stories. The other part is that stories are not the same as wish fulfillment. We have to be prepared to tell uncomfortable stories. Trees tell me that the world isn't all about pleasure and joy. There's death, there's killing, and don't turn away. There's pain and grief and suffering. The darkness and light contain each other, and we can't pretend that it isn't so. We can't divorce the one from the other. An old friend, the tree whom I have sat with over the longest period, said, "Give people what they need, not what they want." I find all this hard. I still do. I have bird friends in my garden who I want to live in comfort for the longest possible lifespan. But the trees tell me I am not a god who can dictate what life has in store. I can connect and collaborate. I can attend and attune. But I can't sequester any being in a harm-free and pain-free state, for that's akin to denying them life or denying life itself. I learned from Tim Bournes, who I mentioned earlier, that Yggdrasil, though the tree suffers, survives Ragnarok, the end of the world. The ash is, after all, eternal. And it protects two beings, life and life lover, who go on to repopulate the world. Tim writes, they perhaps embody the possibility of a hopeful, sustainable post-Ragnarok future. Yet, in this idyllic new world, evil and destruction persists. There's the dreaded death dragon, Shamestriker, I'm not going to attempt his Nordic name, who appears at the very end of the Volva's vision, carrying corpses in his plumage as he flies over the plain. In the poem Grimnismal, a group of serpents beneath Yggdrasil will always damage its branches, and Shamestriker is also said to diminish the tree by gnawing under one of its roots in Gylfaginning, apparently biding his time. As for the saga writers, so for the trees, there's no paradise free of pain, suffering, and death. We have to, as Donna Haraway puts it, stay with the trouble. Because I fret about this, it often comes up in conversations. Recently, a very old lightning-struck oak talked about the importance of the indistinct. And this is hard to express. Basically, it was about how the good lies in a realm of indistinctness. Because all is connected and impacts everything in unexpected ways, it's hard to pin down what's good. What might be seen from one perspective as, I don't know, wrong, unfair, cruel, say, the killing of a baby rabbit, is of course very good from the perspective of the fox's children. That's a very simple example. But in the complex systems of living communities, relationships between all mean that every action has a vast, even infinite realm of repercussions. And randomness intervenes too. So how do you determine how to act? This tree, Majesty, told me the tree's way. We go from seed to plant to soil. As seed, we are all about our own potential. As plant, we grow into the world, and the world grows into us, and we are about each other. As soil, we're all about the world. Thus, a tree matures away from distinctness towards indistinctness. The final thing is something that one tree I call the goddess oak said. She said, I'm not here to be your mirror. Maybe you are here to be mine. I'm not going to offer you other words for this or an explanation. I suggest it as an idea to sit with, a truth in the form of mythos, not logos, a truth that grasps at the ineffable. Trees suggest to me that much that is of the greatest importance, that's the goddess tree, that much that is of the greatest importance is ineffable. This is a symbolic reality that cannot be effed. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Izzy. Incredible. Oh my goodness. What just the combination of the stories and the wisdom and also your own experiences. Incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yes, slightly insane. I do have to do this huge suspension of disbelief because you know, to believe that trees are talking to me and passing on wisdom still feels very weird. But you know, it's not like they're telling me to, you know, go and buy a sharp knife and hurt somebody. So I guess I'll take it in the spirit it's intended.
Yes, in the spirit it's intended. Well, it's beautiful, and I think it's really inspiring to hear everything that you've shared about it. So thank you very much for that. And if anyone would like to ask some questions, now's the time. So you can type it in the chat, or you'd feel more comfortable asking yourself. But we have some time for that now.
Yeah. Hello.
Well, since oh, go ahead. Hi, Mike.
Hello. Hello. How are you doing, Kay? I wanted to ask you, when you look at a forest ecosystem in its most natural state of evolution, and then man comes along and tries to remove that forest and replant that forest, it seems as though that the restoration of a forest as it was is quite difficult. And perhaps, I don't know how to ask this, but a lot of that's going on today. Reforestation. And, but I don't think the reforestation is anything like the original. And all the feeling and everything that you have with that. Do you agree with that?
I do. I mean, there's two things that come up, because I have sort of tried to kind of talk to trees about this. Two aspects. Very old trees. The very old tree, I mentioned one very old tree who said trees like being made into safe houses. This is the oldest tree that I know locally, and the oldest tree that I know locally that's still in good health. And I don't know how old this tree is. I think he must be about 500 years old. And he's not in a woodland. He's in agricultural land. And I asked the tree whether it was difficult not having the mycelial connections to all the other trees.
Yeah.
He said, I'm old enough that I can carry my support system with me. So when he grew 500 years ago, he was born into a very different environment. And I had an impression of that being, a much more, even if it was tree pasture landscape rather than real woodland at that point in England, it was still a lot more wooded. A couple of times I've asked about sort of like human interaction. I think you have the Challara ash dieback fungus in North America as well. It's over here, and the ash trees are the most numerous large trees in the countryside, though most people recognize oaks more readily, but ash trees are really numerous. And I know some very old ash trees as well, lots of younger ones. It's likely that 75 to 90% of them will die over the next 10 years. And an awful lot of them are ill and suffering. And those trees have told me to leave them alone. They have not wanted connection. And they're very different energy. And there's anger. That's what it has felt to me. And I don't know, maybe I'm projecting. It's really difficult to be sure, but you get a sense of sort of goose pimples when you feel as if you're receiving something rather than when you're projecting something. And it felt authentic to me. And the oak trees have said, trees are a lot more forgiving than the animals, than the four-legged people are. The four-legged people are still afraid of you and, are not willing to come close to you. But, but that's not from the perspective of trees that are imminently threatened with, the loss of 75 to 90% of their community. But what you say about old forests is absolutely right. The soil structure in an old forest area, the nutrients, the ability to hold water, the the specific variety of mycelial fungal varieties, but not just that, the different invertebrates, the specific beetles that decompose wood, that decompose living wood. There is that whole community, and it doesn't just come together overnight. It could take 300 years for that to reestablish.
Is there something in between, in the sense of, Mike, given your question, is there something in between, Issy, that is more supportive of self-determination? In other words, is there a kind of restoration which is respondent to the needs of the trees? So in other words, what they need to sort of bootstrap and to what is within their system, their value system, their knowledge system, and listening to them in terms of what can humans do to support whatever direction they see as in their self-governance in that way.
It's difficult because, in terms of a rewilding, a landscape that's allowed to go through the process of the different aspects of succession. So it starts from sort of like grassland into scrubland into small understory trees, and the initial species that come through, like birch, they tend to go through first. There's a special name for them, pioneer species. So birch trees and poplars sometimes as well will sort of like come through, and then gradually the more longer lived tree in this country. So then it would be the oak and the ash, elm in the path, but they're almost all dead as well. They'll come in and they're that much taller and they create that much more shade. And then by that time, the birches and the poplars sort of like fade out, and the landscape sort of like moves on in this wave of succession. Now, that would be the ideal. The difficulty in that is that because the whole system is so sort of like unbalanced, that you don't have, we have a lot of mid-level herbivores that are free living, the muntjac deer, roe deer, fallow deer, particularly in this part of the country. And so their need is to sort of eat young little trees. And so they will sort of, they can prevent they can just eat. I've seen in places oak trees with an apron around them of oak seedlings, and you come through a few weeks later and they've been assiduously munched up by lots of hungry little mouths, because those little mouths, and they don't have any reason not to stay under that oak tree until they've munched up all the little acorns. Obviously it's not the fault of the roe deers and the muntjacs. They're doing their thing. And then the other problem is that you don't have, if you do have the trees sort of all growing up, it becomes very dark and overshaded. The trees are too close together, and then you don't get the growth inside. The trees aren't as healthy, because trees, their sort of ideal is to be sort of like, is to have this broken up mosaic where there are glades, because your big elephant type animal has come through and has sort of knocked things down. All of them, they all want to be part of this working community. That's how they thrive. And we've taken out so many pieces that, how can it work? It's like, how many rivets can you take out? Well, it's not just the damn rivets we've taken out. We've taken out every different aspect of the plane. All we've left is, I don't know, a rivet. Sorry.
No, that's wonderful. I think the term restoration is perhaps not the right word, in the sense of trying to get things back the way they were. That's why I use the term agency and self-determination, in the sense of, which is a withdrawal of the human exceptionalism in that sense. So, in its sense, it's trying to make up for what happened. And there isn't a way to quote unquote make up with what happened. particularly informed by your discussions with the trees. One of the things, while I have the platform, what I wanted to, which I have millions of thoughts and questions, is what happens, or why are you drawn? What happens when you talk to younger trees, or and what do you hear? I mean, that's a generic kind of term, so there's obviously specifics, but your thoughts on that and your experiences.
When I found when trees have been very, very, very old, it's almost I don't know how many of you, there's a poem by Keats. It's not a particularly good poem, called La Belle Dame Sans Merci, and it's about that idea of a knight falling asleep, and then along comes this fairy and she takes him into fairyland. But there's all this sense of feeling sort of sleepy and kind of hallucinogenic. It happens as well in the novel Le Grand Monde, the French novel as well. But with the very, very old trees, there is this feeling of just your consciousness being a different type of consciousness. And so the very old trees can be sort of, you have to be quite grounded to be dealing with the very, very old trees. The very young trees, I really loved a particular tree which is dying, and I took some cuttings from the tree, and I have the cuttings in the garden, and it's like, it's like sort of like kindergarten, there's this sort of like buoyancy, but they really don't have a great deal to say apart from we're alive. Which is nice. I think it's the same sense as elders in a human community. It's that sort of like life lived, and also that stage of the tree's development towards its more growing into this indistinctness of openness towards the world. That they're at a phase, maybe from maturity towards old age before veteranhood, when it's maybe easier to connect with them because of the sort of particular part of life that they're in. Maybe it's metaphysical, maybe it's just my own preconceived notions about who are the valuable people to talk to.
Have you talked to the older trees about the younger trees? I mean, is there a kind of a dialogue or trialogue that has taken place?
I talked to that very old oak tree, the one I mentioned. At the time, I was making you really are all going to think I'm crazy now. I was making wands, okay? I was making wands from little twigs from my favorite trees. and I asked the tree if he would mind, me taking a twig from him. And first of all, he said, yeah, that would be fine. And then he went, you know what, actually, I don't really take it from that young tree next door. He can handle it. And it was that feeling of they have when you're older, you have to be sort of like containing your resources. There's a word about the trees growing down. They grow up and then they start growing down. They can lose their crowns, and you start seeing the branches more coming to embrace the earth. And sometimes the branches will actually lean on the earth and offer other bits of support. And I think that that's kind of connecting period does feel very different. And the young trees feel like now's the time to be shooting upwards. I'm doing my own thing. I'm less kind of interested in the world. I have spoken to one young tree he's at a site where there's an old spring that's been a notable spring in this country, probably since people have been walking through this country, 3,000-4,000 years. It's been a spring. And now there's a church at the spring, and the church is in ruins. So you have this interesting sort of process through time. And there's a very old sequoia there, bizarrely, and a young oak tree. And the oak tree, felt this burden of being in this sort of sacred, consecrated site as a young tree without the requisite sense of majesty that he needed to inhabit the place. And he felt he was given some assurance by other trees, older trees, but there is this sense of not having the, just be it like being a young person, like I haven't got the wherewithal to be able to sort of hold up the mythos that is required, and I think that's the sense that I have throughout these conversations with trees, that there is this, whatever it is that goes all the way down. And I said, I don't know if it's consciousness or whatever. I think that's something that standing people feel deeply, and that we feel far too lightly, so much so that we don't even have a word for it. And it's something that trees grow into with age.
I want to, there's a place in California, in the White Mountains of California, where the oldest trees on earth are found, the bristlecone pine. And you can go up there, and I almost think there's a wisdom of ambience when you go into that area. You can feel it almost there. Those trees, some of them are 5,000 years old.
My God.
And it's out of Bishop. Oh, you go to Bishop, California, and then you go into the White Mountains. And they're over nearly 13,000 feet, 11 to 13. Very difficult climate, but yet they've been there for 5,000 years. And there's a wisdom there in that forest that is palpable.
What did it feel like to you? Where did you feel it?
It's emotional.
Yeah.
These trees, and they still have taken some of those trees, and they still reproduce. They still have viable seeds.
Wow.
But if you ever have a chance to go there, I know you'd appreciate that. I think. I know you would.
I would.
Those trees are older than any civilization humans have ever had.
Yeah.
But I call it an ambient, or a wisdom of an ambience is given off by the wisdom of trees.
Yes. Yes, we don't have anything. I mean, I think the oldest trees in this country are yew trees, which might be like 1,000 years old. I haven't sort of seen them. Like I say, the oldest ones I've seen I've seen some that might be sort of 600, 700, but nothing approaching that age.
Some of the creosote bush in the deserts of California, they're more like aspens, but they say some of those groups are 7,000 years old.
Wow.
The work on that was done by the University of California at Riverside. Did work on that, but yet people will go in there and they'll disrupt those old beings and put in things as ridiculous as houses. I mean, they'll just tear things out. Yeah. Or now we're having solar farms that destroy a lot of the desert, and some of the deserts have the oldest living things you can imagine, but people don't see the desert as alive. They sort of discount it.
Yeah, it's like the very frozen areas. People don't tend to acknowledge all the life that's in very frozen places either. And it's life on a different time scale, and life often in a different actual scale as well. And, no less rich for that.
Joshua trees.
I've heard of Joshua trees.
You've heard of Joshua's. They should be really respected.
Yeah. I would love to see them.
Issy, I just have another, well, I'll just say I have one more question. But you know, we were talked about disbelief and all, and I think one of the issues and problems as such is that these modern humans, or whatever you want to call it, the dominating humans or whatever, have built a belief system and a sense of what truth is based on our senses, and sort of that, and the interface with the externalities as such. And obviously their senses are extremely limited relatively to the full spectrum or infinite spectrum of other species and other ways of knowing and being. And so I guess I would just make a comment about the disbelief, is that when you talk about this, you know, this reading that you get, this sort of interior sort of tapping into an interior ontology, seems very appropriate, because it is not so limited. It's perhaps less restricted than the sense-based epistemes and ontologies. I agree.
My cats. Well, I don't know. They think I'm an idiot.
Beautiful. Thank you, everybody, for all the questions. We have one in the chat as well that I'll read out from Janine, who says, "Thank you very much for an interesting talk. I work in the area of transitional justice, which can take the form of criminal trials, truth commissions, memorials, reparations, etc. It's a very anthropocentric field concerned with large-scale violations of human rights in situations of war and armed conflict, and it critically neglects harms done to more than human worlds. What might the field of transitional justice learn from your work with trees? Thank you."
Oh, I think, that is, what a very beautiful question. And I think not just with trees, but with the sort of more than human generally, to have this sort of like sense of there being of there being a dialogic partnership with, or to open up that dialogue with the more than human, the trees and and all the four-legged and the winged people as well. I mean, that does seem as if that would be interesting. And I know that Eva Meyer has done some work on ideas of sort of like, if the more than human voices in democracy. There is some of that work being done, and it seems to me that would be sort of wonderfully part of that area. I mean, it is interesting that in some of the sort of contested zones, or somewhere like Chernobyl, for example, now ironically is a haven for wildlife, because people don't go there. And I think similarly, isn't there sort of incredible wildlife in the border between the Koreas and in various other places? I think also like maybe on the Russian border to Finland, and all these places that are areas of human contestation, or where we've sort of like moved away for various reasons. The more than human world has sort of like come back into it. But it would be interesting to have some sort of sense of opening up a dialogue of what has been lost, of that sense of reparation, of truth and reconciliation. I think that's really beautiful.
Beautiful. Thank you for your question, Janine. We have another comment in the chat. I really apologize if I mispronounce your name and the name of these trees, but Iyana wanted to comment on the Ute trees, which have been in Colorado for at least 8,000 years. And is that not civilization? And they also say, love that interior ontology. Merci.
Utes are people.
First Nations. Thank you. Excuse me. Yes, so 8,000 years. That's a comment when we were discussing the civilizations and the thousands of the years the trees have been inhabiting the White Mountains, what Mike was discussing.
Yeah, so there is an ongoing human civilization spanning the same period, and living in much greater harmony with those trees, well, with the trees in their particular region of the United States anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Would anyone else like to ask anything or make any comments?
I want to say something I shouldn't because I've been doing too much. But
Go ahead, Mike.
when you talk about these old civilizations of trees and humans, the indigenous people that were in tune with those trees.
Yes. And here as well, and the same in this country as well. I mean, the alphabet of the sort of Celtic people was the letters of the alphabet were named after the trees. So the runes for Celtic are tree names. I mean, that's how important trees were, and not just in sort of like medicines, but in learning and in understanding and in myth. And so I don't know what sort of my background is, or indeed which tribes were related to this particular area, but trees were so important in ancient Britain, in ancient Europe, to the Celtic people, and the Germanic people and the Gauls and so on, just the same as in indigenous peoples in America as well.
But do you think those indigenous roots can reemerge and carry us in a new direction today?
We don't have the problem is the sort of like difficulty of getting people to feel the connection to, if everything that you live by is related to the more than human world, the medicines that you have, the food that you have, and you see that immediate connection, there isn't a question of belief. But if you see it as coming from a plastic packet in a shop, I think it's just really challenging for people to sort of feel their way into it, even if they can understand it, if they can understand it rationally. But I think if people could, and it would, the problem is, I think personally, that it takes change from the top, and that there isn't enough will in the top because of sort of like financial and power related reasons. And I think it would take that to because you'd have to get people to have what they needed, not what they wanted, and we're all used to having what we want rather than just what we need. But I am a bitter cynic and a miserable person, so maybe there's a much happier perspective.
Well, we're glad to hear yours, Issy. And I guess this kind of goes along with Mike's question, but do you think, when you talk about the suspension of disbelief, do you think that this relationship and conversation that you are able to tap into with trees, do you think that this is something anyone and everyone is capable of? And if so, I mean, do you think that would even be valuable for people to tap into, or would it be more detrimental to the trees, do you think, if everyone was just trying to talk to them all the time?
They'd love it. But from what I understand, they would absolutely love it. I mean, I get the feeling that the trees are just sort of, the trees are, well, they're sociable. They're much more sociable than I am. I mean, I'm a miserable hermit. But no, I don't think that would be an issue to the trees. I think it does take a suspension of disbelief. I think it does also take, an openness. I mean, when I first started doing it, I thought that what was happening was a freedom of my unconscious, as in Jung's process of active imagination, as in Freudian free association. And then, shamanic journeys are, the idea is that has a spiritual truth that is sort of like beyond the immediate consciousness. So maybe you're tapping into some kind of collective unconscious. And to be honest with you, I don't know what's happening. I don't, maybe this is all coming out of my unconscious. It doesn't feel like it. And sometimes the trees are really funny and I'm not. So that makes me think that it comes from the trees. And I do think that anyone could do it if they were willing to feel like an idiot, and if they're willing to say something that sounds like you've lost your marbles. Because I do. I mean, I feel like I feel like the sort of, the mad woman in the front room, because I'm not in an attic. But so, you have to be willing to do that. And if you're a bit of an outsider, then maybe you're more willing to embrace that.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it is. And I think if there is a there, which I really hope there is a there. If there isn't, then I'm super impressed by my unconscious, because it's really cool. If there is but if there's a there, then it has been the most. I feel like that ultimate compassionate other is always there, available, and in different days, I'll think, I want to see the goddess tree. Actually, she's like Kali. She's like that kind of, hearer. She's not like some sort of gentle mother figure. She's quite in your face. If I know the Shri that will, that I can go to in a particular state of being, and I can feel heard and seen, and I don't feel alone. Because there's a tree person who cares.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. What a wonderful sense of community, and especially more than human community. Thank you for sharing that. Iana is also wanted to comment, or is wondering if you're in touch with the lovely Irish woman near Ottawa now, Diana Behrensford something.
I'm not in touch with her, but I've read her. I've read her life story books, and I read in a wonderful book by Ben Rawlance called The Tree Line. He spends one of the chapters is all about meeting with her, and oh my God, she is so amazing. That was before I actually started speaking with trees, and but she. Because I think she does have that wonderful blend of the mythos and the logos in the work that she does. Yes. So I know of her, but I don't know her.
Beautiful. That's great. Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add or ask before we wrap up? Looks like that's it for today. Thank you so much, Issy, for everything that you shared with us, and for your inspiring stories and all the wisdom that you shared. It's incredible to chat with you and have this time.
The trees.
Oh, lovely. They're with us too.
They're hazel.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. Our next speaker in this series will be a week from today on Friday, May 10th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We will be joined by Laszlo Nemes, a Hungarian philosopher, bioethicist, and philosophical practitioner living in Budapest, Hungary, who holds a PhD in philosophy. If you enjoy Living One and feel called to support Kerulos, Living One, and all of our sanctuary residents, please do consider donating at the link on our website, kerulos.org. Once again, everybody, and especially Issy, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We really appreciate you being here, and it was really lovely to speak with you. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.